everyone. So welcome to the Boundless Business Podcast. This is our 36th episode. And what are we talking about today, Justine?
Client attribution and understanding some different sales stats and why it's so important to have these stats to work off of.
Yeah. So definitely want to start by kind of diving into that term specifically, attribution. I feel like it's one of those terms that you may hear a lot in kind of like the business world, but without understanding what it means, it might make it sound more maybe intimidating than it is. Realistically, what we're talking about is just understanding where your leads come from. So let's say you have 10 leads in your pipeline. You want to know, let's say 2 of them came from Facebook, 4 of them came from LinkedIn, 4 of them came from email. Sorry, I had to do the math in my head. So understanding those things, right? If 80% of your leads come from LinkedIn and email, maybe you should put more of your efforts there as opposed to Facebook, for example. So that's all we're talking about in terms of attribution, is really just understanding where your leads are coming from. So it's also more about like understanding from those leads where they're coming from. Are they quality leads? Is this driving positive conversations, knowing kind of the rest of your sales process as well to make sure that you're spending time and effort into like basically whatever's working best for you. Whatever's working, that's what you should probably put some money into. It's just a better investment. However, you do want to keep in mind that you want to diversify, and it's good to have a different range of like lead sources. So Justine, do you have any other comments on why knowing your client attribution data is really important?
Yeah, it helps with so much. It helps you understand your customers better, which from a marketing side, it helps you market to more customers. It helps you understand your voice a little bit better. And then from a personalization side, when you're messaging them individually, you know a bit more about them because you know like where they came from and what their journey was leading up to this point. So those are like the 2 main things that I think are super important.
Yeah, of course. And so I want to dive into a couple of those points a little bit more. Number 1, understanding your customers better. That's so important, especially if you think about it, right? Let's say your marketing agency, and you typically target 2 titles. You typically target founders and CEOs and marketing managers, right? What is super valuable for you to understand even is to look at all of the people who, if you have, and I'm just going to use examples of campaigns and things we have, right? So if you have, let's say, LinkedIn campaigns and email campaigns, if you have those 2 buckets, being able to understand which titles work better on either platform is better, because maybe your CEOs and founders aren't really checking their email, but they do check their LinkedIn, and your marketing managers might be checking their email more than they check the LinkedIn. So understanding not only where do people come from, but what drives success for each of those individual lead sources. So kind of understanding your customers better makes it a lot easier, because then in the previous example, right, let's say your marketing managers are much more responsive on email. Well, then you target your email campaigns to marketing managers, and you target your LinkedIn campaigns to CEOs, and you're going to see better results, assuming you've tested and you see that like that's kind of where you're getting best results from in those 2 areas. So knowing your customers better, it does help as well on the individual conversation, right? I mean, I have it all the time where I go and I'm like, oh, I have a meeting on Tuesday. Who's that with? Where did they come from? What's the conversation we had prior? It's good to get that kind of background, especially before jumping into a meeting, and understanding where things come from makes it so much easier. So if I had to go, let's say I have a meeting on Tuesday, if I had to go and just be like, well, I have no idea where this one came from, I'm just going to go look through every single one of my LinkedIn messages. I'm going to go look through every single one of my Facebook messages, my Instagram DMs, my emails, everything. Not only is that kind of wasteful on my time, but again, I'm not really understanding the customer better very well. And then, that kind of ties into enhancing personalization. You can say, oh, crazy things are happening on LinkedIn. Did you hear about the LinkedIn outage last week? Or, you can use that as different points, as well as understanding the individual better by doing a little bit of research from them, largely maybe on the platform that you first interacted with them. So if it's email, that one's a little bit harder to do research on, but then you can just kind of plug them in and look them up on LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. And to kind of find a point, it does save a lot of money. It's much more effective, especially, and we'll get into kind of more specific like KPIs in a bit. But really the best way to make your marketing spend as effective as possible is by going in and saying, okay, we're going to improve these individual metrics. So without having accurate data on who you're targeting, where they're coming from, what type of campaign they're coming from, who's coming where, who shows up, who doesn't show up, who books, who doesn't book, which of those people are you sending contracts to or proposals to, and then which are closing, and understanding all of that down to the attribution level. That's really important, and that can save you a lot of money, especially because then you can go and say, oh, people from LinkedIn, they're just not showing up to my meetings. That might mean you need a different process for your LinkedIn campaigns to get people on the meetings. Things like that can really help a lot. Otherwise, it really goes into there's so many different ways that you can dive into this data to improve your business overall, whether that's on a marketing front, on a sales front, just your general operations, making things smoother. It helps a ton.
Do we kind of want to jump into those KPIs now and dig a little deeper?
Sure. So it's important. We talked a bit about attribution. So it's important to know things on the lead side, right? Where do leads come from? That's definitely your most important thing that you want to start with. Understanding where are your leads coming from? And you want to look at that in multiple stages, right? If they're like top of the funnel versus bottom of the funnel. So where are you getting the best conversion from getting people to kind of into your overall network versus having actual conversations with them versus being able to take those conversations into a sales call and transition that into a sales conversation. Knowing the numbers between all of those are really important, and being able to understand them all at an attribution level. So to say, my email, let's say we get a 50% open rate on email, right? That's your top of the funnel. But you get a 35% connection rate on LinkedIn. That's also the top of the funnel. Understanding those two initial metrics at every single stage is really important. So you want to be able to define and again, think of it as a funnel, most people in the top, and you're not going to reach all of them. So, how many people get to the bottom, but at each stage in that funnel is where you want to be able to improve individual metrics. So in that whole customer journey, right? And the customer journey is going to vary depending on the platform they come from. So again, understanding why attribution is so important. You can't customize those customer journeys without knowing where they came from first. That's super huge. So beyond that, right? Beyond the top of the funnel, let's go a little bit deeper. So these are people we're just going to say, you're really good at getting people into the top of the funnel. Next, you go into conversations. How many of those people at the top of the funnel actually take some action to engage with you in some other way? We like to measure it ourselves in conversations. If you're doing, let's say, ad conversions and things, the general thought process is still different. The metrics you track, the general thought process is the same. However, the general statistics and KPIs that you track are going to be different. So for us, who most of our new business comes from actually sales calls, that is going to be different than people who most of their new business comes from clicks and just ads, and basically getting people through a funnel that's not it's not the same as a sales funnel, right? A digital funnel versus a more traditional like sales call funnel. So for us on the sales call side, right, we need to understand who came from where, how many of them got into the top of the funnel, how many of them actually started conversations with us, and once they start conversations, how many do we send calendar links to? How many are we actually booking with? Of those that we sent calendar links to, we need to know how many showed up. Like, that's a huge thing. If we send 10 calendar links out, but nobody books a meeting and nobody shows up, well, that's not that helpful for us. We can send out calendar links all day long. It doesn't mean anybody's going to come. But being able to understand, let's say, oh, if we send a calendar link to somebody on LinkedIn, they're more likely to book, means maybe we need to change our email process, or maybe we need to put more effort into LinkedIn. At that point of the stage, if everything else is going well, it's probably better to improve that platform to improve the show up rate of somebody coming from a different platform. But beyond that, right, you still want to be able to understand how many of those that did show up went to a contract or proposal stage or a referral stage. You know, how many of them did you get the opportunity to bid for their business, essentially? Because a lot of sales calls, you get on the call and you're like, look, this isn't a good fit. It's okay, no big deal. But that's good to know too. If you have a really high percentage of people that you meet with that are not a good fit, you're probably targeting the wrong people. And understanding that at the attribution level is hugely important as well, to be able to say, the people that are coming from LinkedIn are not looking great. The reason for that is possibly that we're targeting the wrong people. So being able to understand this, you know, from really the top to the bottom, then once they do get a contract or proposal, how many of them actually sign and move forward? Because you can typically send out, if you send out 10 proposals, let's say you'll maybe get 2 of them. Being able to understand, like, oh, if both of the ones we signed came from email, that tells us something versus both of them having come from LinkedIn, right? Again, it all has to go back to, in the initial campaigns, that's why we do our attribution. In the initial lead generation process, how are those? Are those good leads? And we can tell that all the way through the end of the sales process. It's also important to know, high level, how long does it take people to get to each step? So for anybody who's going to be kind of doing this themselves, my recommendation is to start at your final thing. So for us, it's contracts closed, and work backwards to figure out, of those contracts closed, how many contracts did we send total? Of the contracts we sent total, how many meetings did we actually even have? Of the meetings we had scheduled, how many people showed up? Of the people who showed up, how many did we invite to those meetings in general? Of the people we invited to those meetings, how many conversations did we have overall? Being able to understand these stats backwards and forwards is really important, and it's a good way to kind of work backwards. And understanding the stats, again, for each individual marketing lever that you pull, essentially. So I just talked for a while. Justine, I don't know if you have any questions on any of that.
I was just gonna ask more on the software side. What kind of software do we use to enable these statistics to be seen and analyzed?
Well, anybody who is a return listener probably knows that I'm a huge Airtable fan. It doesn't have to be Airtable. Honestly, you can do this in many different platforms. You know, even basically you just want something that's going to break things out in stages. So to be able to understand your leads coming in, they're all in a stage. So as long as you can tell how long they've been in each stage, that's all you realistically need to know, and be able to attribute it to each one.
Gotcha. Yeah. What advice do you have for people who are just starting out with this process of reading all of this data and analyzing it and trying to improve on their campaigns and their client attribution?
So my first bit of advice is start by writing all your stages down. So start by understanding, because it's different, right? What matters for us in our business is going to be different than somebody else. They might have a different sales process. Let's say you're in a industry that requires a much more in-depth sales process, I guess I could say. Let's say you have to submit a full RFP and maybe you're bidding for like public business, meaning you have to submit an RFP and it's got to be like 40 pages long and you have to go through really intensive questioning by the government agency or whatever, right? That's obviously going to extend your sales cycle. So it's going to take a lot longer to do any of these things. But realistically, start with understanding each stage of your sales process, understanding then where do all your leads currently come from, and then try to map all of the leads in your CRM as much as you can into where did they originate, and then what happened next. So basically, as long as you know where they came from and each of the stages, that should get you 95% of what you need to know. So beyond that, then, and this is one of the reasons I like Airtable too, you can understand better, like once you know the stages and the high level things, then you can get into, oh, well, it takes me 8 days to convert a lead from Facebook, but only 6 days to convert a lead from LinkedIn, for example. Being able to understand those things are important too, because either then you want to improve your Facebook time to maybe more match your LinkedIn time, or you want to make some slight changes to improve those individual metrics. And that's another thing that I would definitely recommend. Start by getting all the numbers in place, get a baseline for your data. So let the system set for a week or two, understand your baseline data, then pick individual metrics to work on week over week. So meaning this week I'm working on improving my meeting show up rates. That could be something as simple as adding in a couple reminder emails for the meeting that day, or adding in some automation, some text or whatever, things that basically just help remind people to show up. Versus maybe the next week you're working on improving your top of the funnel. So that would be adjusting the initial thing that gets people into your zone, into your world, right? So for us, usually that's email campaigns, LinkedIn campaigns. We do some Twitter. Those are probably our 3 main sources right now. So for us, top of the funnel, right, would be, we're like, okay, we want to get more people to just be in our universe. We're going to focus on improving our open rates this week. And then the next week, maybe we're like, okay, more people are in our universe. Now we want to focus on how do we get them to reply more. So we focus on improving our reply rates. So understanding everything from a granular level is really important, because then you see what's working and what is not.
Right. So you're not
that's what I'd recommend.
Making drastic changes to everything right away, right? You're kind of looking at each individual piece of data and then seeing, okay, what small things can I improve? And so you're not like changing everything all at once.
Yeah, don't completely overhaul your system and change like 40 things every single week. The reason for that being, if something works, you have no idea what it was. Or if something breaks, more importantly, you don't know what broke. You don't know what ruined your stuff. So you have to revert everything if something breaks, and you have to go completely back. Versus if you change one thing and it improves stuff by, let's say, 6%, well, like, okay, that's an improvement. That's something I can measurably work towards. Then the next week you change one more thing, and on and on and on. And so that's what I recommend in general. Anything really that involves like improving KPIs, you need to get a baseline, and then you need to improve them week over week. Unless you can collect enough statistics to be able to do it day by day. For some things, right, like ad campaigns, you might actually be able to do those on a day by day basis, depending on the volume you have. But understanding your sample size, make sure you're not making a decision based on one single person. A good sample size is typically, start with like 50 to 100 in terms of leads. Our preference is usually like, we don't make any decisions about campaigns that send out less than 100 initial. So we want to know of that 100, what happens next. And that's still kind of a small sample size. You realistically want more than that. But if you have a campaign of 10 people, you can't really make any like measurable decisions off of that. So know your sample size in the beginning.
Very good advice. Anything else you want to leave the listeners off with before we end it?
Just that I know that we went over kind of a lot more of the technical side of things, and it is really important to know who your leads are, where they come from, and how successful you are with them throughout your sales process. So take it step by step, take it day by day. I know, again, we went over a lot of technical jargon, but really to boil it down, know the steps in your process and know how long it takes people to get from one step to the other and how many get to the next step. That's the whole gist. That's this entire podcast episode distilled into like 2 sentences.
Thank you everyone for listening. I don't know Nico's whole sign off. He does it so well, but thank you everyone for listening. And we will see you next week. Peace.